Dr. Alice Freiburg and Professor Andreas Seidler. I know at least that they are experts in assessment of work-related diseases, and they'll show in a few minutes why. Thank you very much, both.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, Central Europe time. Good evening, Sydney time. Maybe my daughter's listening. Hello to all participants all over the world. Is knee osteoarthritis in professional football players an occupational disease? We would like to reflect this question against the background of the German occupational disease system, and afterwards we would like to present a systematic review on this topic. The German statutory accident insurance was founded by Chancellor Bismarck in the 80s of the 19th century. First, only included work-related accidents, and since 1925, also occupational diseases. Main criterion for an occupational disease is occupational causation. All physicians in Germany are obliged to report suspected occupational diseases. So musculoskeletal occupational diseases begin with the number 2, and altogether we have 80 occupational diseases in the list. In 2019, there were about 80,000 cases of suspected occupational diseases decided, and of those, about 18,000 occupational diseases were recognized. About 2,500 people died from occupational disease in 2019, most of them due to asbestos exposure decades ago. So if we compare the incidence of recognized occupational diseases between Germany and other European countries, we see German is the red line. We see a relatively low incidence of recognized occupational diseases in Germany. This is mainly due to the very low incidence of recognized musculoskeletal occupational diseases in Germany. On this slide, you can see the most frequent occupational diseases in Germany, sorted by the reports of suspected occupational diseases in orange. So the by far most common recognized occupational disease is hearing loss due to occupational noise, followed by squamous skin cancer. The most common musculoskeletal occupational disease is lumbar spine disease, followed by knee osteoarthritis, with 200 recognized new occupational diseases per year. But this is not due to professional soccer, but due to kneeling, for example, by floor layers or comparable occupations. How can epidemiologic studies help to decide about occupational causation? We all have an individual non-occupational basic risk of any disease, for example, of knee osteoarthritis. And there may be an occupational excess risk of 1.5. That would mean that the probability of occupational causation would be 1/3, 33%. And if the occupational excess risk equals the non-occupational basic risk, then the probability of occupational causation would be 50%. So if this threshold the doubling risk would be succeeded, an occupational causation as a rule of thumb is more likely than unlikely. In the German list of occupational diseases, there are 7 occupational diseases that explicitly are based on this doubling risk. For example, the disease number 2112, osteoarthritis of the knee caused by kneeling or comparable knee straining activities with a cumulative exposure period in the whole working life of at least 13,000 hours. So this doubling dose of 13,000 hours is derived from a key case control study conducted by Helene Sandmark. So how does a new occupational disease arise? There is an expert advisory committee, Occupational Diseases, which is advising the German Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. I am a member of this expert committee. And on this slide, you can see the diseases that are currently under discussion as potential new occupational diseases. Among them, knee osteoarthritis in professional football players. To further elucidate the association between soccer and knee osteoarthritis, the German Ministry of Labor commissioned a systematic review, and we got the grant. So I would like to hand over to Alice Freiberg for the results of this systematic review.
Okay, before I start with introducing the methods and the results, I want to give a short background. Professional soccer players suffer from high strains due to several reasons. For example, they have a very high running performance during a game and also during training, and they have they have to stop and to accelerate very often. They further have an increased risk for injuries of the knees, whereby you have to distinguish between macro injuries like the rupture of the cruciate ligaments or meniscal tears, and you further have to distinguish in micro injuries like the consequences of contusions or torsions. In Germany, a knee osteoarthritis in professional soccer players can only be recognized if it is a secondary form due to a traumatic knee injury after an accident at work. You cannot recognize it as in a primary form. In the past, several reviews have investigated the association between playing professional soccer and knee osteoarthritis, but these suffered from some methodological or content-related flaws. For example, some did not require quality criteria like double study selection or using critical appraisal tools. Some did also include primary studies without comparison proofs. Some did not include very important primary studies on the topic, and many did not consider macro injuries in the analysis about the risk of knee osteoarthritis in professional soccer players. And thus, we conducted the systematic review also to overcome these flaws. Okay. We asked 2 research questions. The main research question was, do professional soccer players have an increased risk for knee osteoarthritis? And a sub-research question was, do professional soccer players without macro injuries of the knee joint have an increased risk for knee osteoarthritis? Prior to the conduct of the review, we set some inclusion and exclusion criteria. We only included studies on professional soccer players who played soccer professionally. Primary study had to have a comparison group consisting of employed persons. The outcome of interest was knee osteoarthritis, and it could have been diagnosed in several forms, like radiologically or arthroscopically, but also by self-report or clinical investigation. We only considered epidemiological observational studies, namely cohort studies, cross-sectional studies, and case control studies, and a study needed to have a response of at least 10% and needed to have a representative recruitment procedure to ensure or to avoid selection bias within a study. We used the PRISMA statement to ensure a high reporting quality. We published the study protocol prior to the conduct of the review. We searched the medical databases Medline, EMBOS, and the Web of Science on March 26, 2019, and we further conducted hand searches by forward searches and screening reference lists. The titles and abstracts, as well as the full text of the database search, were screened by 2 reviewers independent from each other, and the hand searches were carried out by 1 reviewer, and if a full text seemed to be illegible for inclusion, another or second reviewer also screened the full text. We extracted the data in standardized data extraction forms by 2 reviewers, and also assessed the quality of the included studies by using a risk of bias assessment tool, and this was also done by 2 reviewers. And we conducted several statistical analyses, like meta-analysis on the associations using random effects models, and for an association, at least 3 studies needed to be excluded. We tried to derive an exposure-response relationship and also a doubling based on 1 study for recreational soccer. And we assessed the quality of the evidence by using the CRATE assessment tool. Here you can see the results. And here you can see the results of the study selection. By searching the databases, we found nearly 15,500 references, and by the hand searches, 3,000 references. After excluding duplicates, we need to screen 13,000 titles and abstracts. Of these, we excluded nearly all of them, and only 39 full text seemed to be relevant, and thus we screened the full text, and of these 9 studies were included in our qualitative and quantitative statistics. For the title abstract screening, we had a moderate agreement according to Cohen's kappa, and for the full text screening, the agreement between the reviewers was very good, with a kappa of 0.75. Here you can see the study characteristics of 5 of the included studies. All of the 9 studies were included, were conducted in Europe. 1 was on retrospective studies and 5 cross-sectional studies. All of these investigated professional soccer players, and most of these 6 had population controls. Only 1 had as a comparison professional shooters, and the outcome was investigated with different forms of diagnosing. And then we also had 3 case control studies, which included professional soccer and recreational soccer, and one of these was able to differentiate between professional and recreational soccer. Here you can see the results of the risk of bias assessment. In short, I want to tell you that we investigated 6 major domains, which was the basis for the overall risk of bias assessment of a study. And to have a low risk of overall bias, all of these 6 major domains needed to be of low risk of bias. To answer the research question 1, we conducted 2 meta-analyses, and you can see the first one. There we summarized all studies with objectively diagnosed knee osteoarthritis diagnosis, and the pool of ratio was 2.3, meaning that professional soccer players have a 2.3-fold increased risk for developing knee osteoarthritis compared to the general population. And then we also merged radiologically diagnosed knee osteoarthritis, and there the odds ratio was even higher. But here you have to be cautious, as one of these studies had professional shooters as comparison group, and these seem to be healthier than the general population, leading to a higher odds ratio. From answering the second research question, does a knee osteoarthritis occur even when a professional soccer player did not have a macro injury of the knee? Compared studies which excluded macro injuries with those which did not, and we found that even when participants with macro injuries were excluded, the risk for knee osteoarthritis was 2.8-fold increase for developing the disease. And also, if a study adjusted for the macro injuries of the knee, the risk was increased, as you can see, of the odds ratio of 2.71. And then we further tried to derive an exposure-response relationship in the way that research studies which had a odds ratio for recreational soccer and professional soccer. 2 studies fulfilled this requirement, and these studies showed that the risk for knee osteoarthritis in professional soccer players was higher than that of recreational soccer players compared to the general population. So we assume that there is kind of a response relationship based on this analysis.
On the basis of these results, it seems quite clear that professional soccer can lead to knee osteoarthritis. But how much soccer is needed to damage the knee? There was only one study that allowed for deriving the dose-response relationship, which was our own case control study. And you can see in the categorized analysis that the doubling risk is reached between 1,700 and 4,000 hours of soccer playing. However, the dose-response relationship is not linear. So we reanalyzed the data based on the continuous number of soccer hours, applying a non-linear model, second-degree polynomial, and we could find a doubling dose of about 6,000 hours of soccer playing. I would like to underline that this case control study mostly includes recreational soccer, not professional soccer. So this study cannot be transferred to professional soccer. We found low to moderate quality of evidence for the relationship between professional soccer and knee osteoarthritis when we applied the grade assessment, with an overall relative risk estimate of 2.3. But even when we excluded macro injuries, the considerably elevated relative risk remained. I would like to underline that the included studies did not allow for a more precise localization of the joint damages. And there weren't any studies on female professional soccer players. As a methodological strength of our study, we excluded all studies based on convenience samples and all studies that had a very low response. We did not consider body mass index as a key confounder because BMI might also be a consequence of soccer playing. So, for more detailed information, I would like to refer to a publication in the Deutsche Ärzteblatt International coming soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and of course, Alice. A very detailed and well thought of study. You did a wonderful job and even left minutes over for discussion. So feel free. Maybe Mario, you can start the discussion. Mario, you're alive? Well, I'll start with the first question. Is Mario Maas, the colleague on the left or the right, is a radiologist. Is radiology needed to assess whether or not it's an occupational disease? You showed in your data that there's a higher risk in the meta-analysis, but is it really necessary?
In the studies, there was not such a large difference between the results of the study which had radiologically diagnosed knee osteoarthritis. But for sure, in the diagnosis of an occupational disease, it would be necessary to have a radiologically diagnosed knee osteoarthritis with specific criteria, which we already have for the occupational disease number 2112 in Germany.
Thank you very much. I'll look at the comments. If there are any participants who are willing to ask a question. I learned that Mario was not able to unmute himself, so that's why he's very quiet at the moment. No? How's the follow-up in Germany? What does Andreas Neuer think about this new criteria for knee osteoarthritis as an occupational disease, or how is it landed in the German professional soccer field? Could you elaborate on that?
I'm not sure if it is already landed there. At the moment, there are large discussions in the scientific community, and for sure we don't know what will be the final decision if we will get an occupational disease or not. So I think it will take some time till we get the final decision.
Okay. And if there are no other questions or comments, I'm very lucky. I even got a third question. So for me, as a recreational soccer player, I don't have to worry about knee osteoarthritis. So I can just play on every Sunday morning in the park.
Yeah, you have to worry. It depends from the hours you are playing in the park. Because if you do recreational soccer for 6,000 hours, then your knee osteoarthritis risk is doubled.
Okay.
So
yes,
not too much.
Yeah, but I registered, so I know I'm only at 4,000 hours, so I got 2,000 hours left. So don't worry, feel free. Yeah. Any other comments? No? Let's see, no comments. Finally, your paper is in German. Maybe that's no, it's in
No, it is in German, but it's also in English. So the complete paper will be published in English, but it will take a few weeks or maybe
yeah,
months.
okay. One small final question from the audience. Do you expect results to differ regarding women soccer players?
I don't know. I guess not. There were, or not in the near future, maybe later. There were 3 studies or 4 studies on female professional soccer players, but these did not have a comparison group or did not fulfill our requirement for recruitment. So we could not include them, but they were older, so there are not many yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we
Again.
have to do an international study, I think.
I think a lot of us like to join. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, given the time, Jari Damen, sorry. We'll have to switch to the other presenter. Hope you have understanding for that.